Good morning and welcome to the North Shore Outcomes Research seminar, in the first in our Health Equity and Implementation Science research series. Today, we are delighted to be joined by our guest lecturer, Dr. Elaine Morrato, who will be presenting on I-Core and community-based implementation science. We will also be joined by an expert panel, including Dr. Michael Bloom and Merle Thomas from Loyola University, and from Claire Rittenhouse from North Shore University Health System. Today's seminar is also being co-sponsored by the University of Chicago Center for Health and the Social Sciences as part of their Outcomes Research Workshop series. And so we're very excited to have this first in our Health Equity Plus Implementation Science series launched today. Just a bit about the Outcomes Research Network, and I'd like to start off by thanking the North Shore leadership, the director of the Outcomes Research Network, Dr. Susan Fisher, and all of those who are working on the front lines as healthcare workers or in the community in the quest to promote health equity, who are really what this seminar series is all about. And our Outcomes Research Workshop is committed to supporting leadership and research support across our North Shore and Institute for Translational Medicine academic communities. Our goals are to improve community access to effective and efficient and equitable healthcare, enrich the practice of medicine, and to support key clinical quality and operational decision-making across our system, fueled by evidence. And the objectives of our healthcare, health equity and implementation science series are to disseminate research that advances implementation of health equity in our health systems, in our community, policy change to promote equitable care and outcomes, and advancing translational science. And we want to support flourishing clinical investigators across Chicagoland and promote a culture of collaboration and team science, and hopefully connect a lot of people to their peer community across Chicagoland. And ultimately, as a result of all of this clinical and translational science, to deliver improved equitable population health outcomes for our communities. I'm Sean David. I am Program Director for Translational Science in the Outcomes Research Workshop Network. And my co-pilot is Rachel Brewington, who is an administrator in the Outcomes Research Workshop and Department of Family Medicine at North Shore. And I'd like to thank all of those joining us today, all participants as well, and hand this over to Elaine for some of the logistics of the seminar.
Thank you very much, Dr. David. Hello, everybody. Today's CME credit is being provided for attending today's seminar. So to mark your attendance and claim your CME, you can text the SMS code that you see on the screen to the number listed on the screen. The University of Chicago Pritzker School of Medicine designates this live activity for a maximum of 1.5 AMA PRA Category 1 credits. Physicians should claim only the credit that corresponds with the extent of their participation in the activity. Other healthcare professionals will receive a certificate of participation. The opportunity to claim credit will open at the start of today's seminar and close after 30 days. Credit cannot be retroactively granted beyond the 30-day period, so it is important to text promptly after the seminar to successfully claim your credit. More instructions on how to retrieve your CME credit will be emailed to you after the seminar. In today's webinar, all attendees will be muted with the exception of our panelists and speakers. However, there will be some opportunity for interaction. If you have any questions or comments at any point during the presentation or the Incubator Hub discussion, please submit your communication by using the chat function as noted by the blue arrow on the screen. If you are on a computer, you can access this icon by hovering your mouse over the bottom of your screen. Please give special attention to the audience of your message before you submit. As you can see on the image to the right, you can choose to message either the panelists or the speakers. This will include myself. Or you can choose to message everyone on the webinar. Feel free to leave your questions and comments at any point during the presentation. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please let me know by messaging all panelists and I will assist you as best I can. Okay, thank you so much, and I'll hand it back to Dr. David, who will go over our agenda for the day.
Thank you so much, Rachel. All right, well, we're going to, after the introduction, have the opportunity to welcome Dr. Morrato, who will be speaking from 10:40 to 11:15. During that time, I encourage participants to enter questions into the comments box so that Elaine can then, during our Q&A session at 11:15, field those to Dr. Morrato. Following that, we will have an Incubator Hub expert panel discussion where we will be joined by Drs. Bloom and Thomas and Claire Rittenhouse, and then we will have some closing remarks at the end, including a link to an evaluation. So it's my, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Elaine Morrato, who is the founding dean of the Parkinson School of Public Health and Health Sciences and Public Health at Loyola University of Chicago. Dr. Morrato is a pioneer in the field of implementation science, who comes to Chicago from the University of Colorado, and is also the lead for the Institute for Translational Medicine Implement Science Core. Dr. Morrato is going to be talking about her work on community-based health equity and at the nexus of implementation science. And so, Elaine, thank you for joining us, and we would like to hand the podium over to you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. So let me share my screen here. And here we go. Going into presentation mode. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to be joining me today. It's quite an honor to be talking about work that's going on within the implementation science cluster within the ITM. And I really look forward to the discussion on the application of the method I'll be talking about today, I-Core, and how we might use this as a tool to facilitate translation with a health equity lens. I have my disclosures here as well. And so what I'd like to cover in our next 30 minutes together is the following learning objectives. To share with you about key definitions and concepts that relate nested within implementation science, specifically what is termed designing for dissemination and sustainability. Then to share and examine with you a particular methodology called I-Core at the National Centers for Advancing Translational Science, or I-Core at NCATS, as a methodology to facilitate in that design. And then to talk about application of this method. Some of you may have heard of I-Core in the context of commercialization. And I would like to share how it might be used as a method for community-based intervention development, implementation in health, and adaptation to address health equity or health disparities. And at the end, we'll also connect you with available I-Core training that is free, and how, if you participate in that training, it unlocks other opportunities for funding through the implementation science cluster. Okay. The roadmap, I always like to start with, how are we going to work through this? Why are we designing for dissemination and sustainability? What does the field tell us why we should be doing this up front, beginning with the end in mind? A background of how the I-Core program developed, and then review the method itself. So when we say I-Core, what's really involved in that? And to discuss some case application. How is this relevant and applicable for maybe the type of research or quality improvement work that you are already doing? And as I said, we'll close with some available resources. So the big why for why do we focus on translational science in general is it's a failure to translate. The landmark Institute of Medicine report, now 2 decades old, quoted data that shows it takes almost 2 decades for new knowledge that comes from randomized data, trials, et cetera, to be incorporated into practice. And even then, the application is highly uneven. There have been numerous meta-analysis and systematic reviews that look at the adoption of clinical practice guidelines. And about half of those guidelines are adhered to at any moment in time. And we know also that if you look at the adherence to medicines, for example, about half of patients, are still taking medicines 1 year after being prescribed. So it's a human failure to translate that we as implementation scientists have to be vigilant and diligent on. But it's not just the work we do academically. If you look at this as an equivalent to a startup, tech startup, for example, the vast majority of startups also fail. And that's because what we experience in implementation of health knowledge is very similar to what a startup or a company faces. And it's termed the valleys of death. You know, on
Excuse
the
me, Dr. Morrato, my apologies.
Oh.
If you could please at the top of your screen switch to presentation mode, we still see your notes at the moment.
Oh, okay. So
Towards-
let me stop sharing. Yeah, I thank you for clarifying that.
No problem.
Share a different screen. You can see all my fantastic notes. All right. Are you
Thank you.
seeing
Thank you.
now just the screen? Thank you so much, Rachel.
No problem.
Okay, so it's a common problem, this idea of valleys of death. So on the right-hand side, you see a report from the National Institute of Technologies in the US. And they'll conceive of this as market failure in these various, how do you go from government and university innovation, and then how do you get it to the private sector? It's one of going from a research to a product development or scaling before it actually gets to capacity and sustainability in a commercial way. But those same valleys of deaths occur essentially at every phase of translation as you go from discovery, from bench to bedside, and you think of an intervention that can be used in clinical practice. As you go from bedside to practice and population, and how you think also, therefore, going to scale and sustainability. Each one of these steps are a moment in time where we're needing to talk about what's the value of the intervention to the next phase of adopters. And so if you look at the business literature, what they say is in another survey, why are startups failing? The top reason is that they're focusing on products, technology, service, or et cetera, or features that no one really wants. And they're working on things that are very interesting, very technologically advanced, but they have not really identified that salient market need for their product. That is a convincing motivation why someone should buy or continue to purchase. And so that's a reason why companies struggle. But it's very analogous to what we call inertia or clinical inertia as an enemy of therapeutic success, or clinical inertia or patient inertia in the adoption of things in general. I pulled this citation from a recent paper that focused on diabetes care, but you could say that these barriers are consistent across many domains. There's clinician reasons for this inertia overload, work burnout, insufficient time. They may not believe what they're hearing. They're not necessarily sure how that's going to make their job or life any better. Patients are also going through their various levels of objection in terms of either denying they have a problem that needs to be solved, or maybe not having the literacy skills to understand what's really being described, or not having an intervention that fits into the lifestyle or work patterns of them. And then there's also the healthcare system. So lack of guidelines, lack of, how is this, we operate in a resource constrained environment. So the reason why I'm sharing this compare and contrast is to show that many of the problems that might occur in a commercial side is the same kinds of root cause problems that we deal with in a non-commercial side when we were hoping that we develop wonderful new ways to address health disparities or to improve patient care. And we have that same translational challenge. And so that's where implementation science as a field steps in. It aims to accelerate as a method the translation, and it's sometimes referred to as D&I, or dissemination and implementation, where dissemination is the component of the field where the idea is to spread knowledge and awareness about a particular need for treatment or a particular new innovation to address that problem. And implementation are the set of strategies that we might consider to help facilitate the adoption. Not just the initial initiation of adoption, but sustained adoption over time. And so within this field, there is an emerging interest that we, historically it's been, you should not disseminate anything until you have every evidence-based intervention well documented. And so that's a downstream effect of dissemination. I won't think about dissemination and implementation until I'm all at the end of my process of evidence generation. The emerging thought in the field is that we should be beginning with the end in mind more deliberately. That is, designing for what will be dissemination and sustainability down the road, and that we might think of this as fit to context. So the context of the setting, the populations of people that we're working with, the healthcare system setting is very important as we think about the intervention design itself. And we might have phases at conceptualization of the problem, the partnerships we might need to have with community or with other stakeholders, how we think about the intervention itself, what are the outcome measures that we might need to collect, what's information that's patient-centered and most important, and importantly, how do we at these early stages gather information that will inform the dissemination and sustainability systems that are needed in place in order for that adoption to be successful. So thinking of the context from the beginning and all the way towards the scaling of it. So we all hope that the work that we do shows not only a benefit in our own backyard, but that might be generalizable and used by others. And so what we are proposing is that this is an iterative fit to context process that occurs throughout this development translational life cycle. And if we think of the Institute of Translational Medicine and our challenge, our call to action, is that we as a hub should be engaging you all and as peers and co-learning on activities to support innovative approaches by doing this fit to context and this translation. And that's where I would like to frame the I-Corps program at NCATS. That this is a methodology that's been developed, as I'll share, from a commercial lens that can be also adapted and applied to our translational problem of sustaining and scaling our research and innovation as well. So a few slides on background. I've heard many different ways people talk about it. I-Corps, I-Corps. The Corps represents like Corps of Engineers or AmeriCorps, that we have a training of people across the country that will bring this innovative entrepreneurial mindset to academic research. The I stands for innovation. It was initially launched about a decade ago in collaboration between the National Science Foundation and a serial entrepreneur at Stanford, and the application, if you've heard of lean startup methodology, to the academic audience. And it was adapted for academic teams just like us. And at its very core, its aim is to address urgent national needs of training our workforce academically so that we're thinking of that translation and sustainability from the onset. That by doing this, we're also facilitating the translation of our technologies that hopefully will lead to important economic outcomes, but also nurturing the national innovation ecosystem. This has been going on now for many years, and the program itself takes teams, academic teams, through these sort of stages of fit. So it's very similar to this fit to context that we're talking about in implementation science. Being very clear and intentional. What's the problem you're trying to solve? So is there good problem and solution fit with the innovation? Is there good product market fit? Have you gotten preliminary data? Are there more than one people that find this a very important problem such that we should scale it? We might call that, what's the societal significance of the work? And then is there a business model fit? So often after we show the evidence that our innovation does great things, it's how do we sustain the work that the intervention that we've created after the grant ends? That's a business model fit question. So it relates to the adoption, the implementation, and sustainability, as I said. And going through this program, they have a business model canvas so that as you think about your innovation in a business model way, on a one-pager, can you clearly articulate the various components that are necessary for you to continue to have this sustain and thrive? all the way from what's your target customer, your value proposition, who are important relationships and partnerships, what resources you're needed, what cost structure is needed to sustain, and how are you going to generate revenue. But at the very core of the program, and that's the core of what we're doing here at the ITM, is clear articulation of what is the value to a particular user or adopter. And that's what is the value proposition, customer segment, problem solution fit. And I'll talk more about that. So since I-Corps was developed by NSF, there have been over 2,500 teams that have been trained. Half of those teams have gone to actually form startups, and over $3 billion of funding raised to accelerate this innovation into societal impact. You can now look at it as a national innovation network of various academic sites throughout the country. They're grouped by hubs based on geographic region, and this is really a national network of I-Corps sites that we're part of. So here in Chicago, you have University of Illinois Chicago, and you have University of Chicago with I-Corps sites that are geared towards the science technology of NSF and a commercialization orientation. Well, NIH saw what was going on at NSF and said, that sounds very applicable for our small business innovation research funds. These are the small companies that receive grants, partnered with academic institutions who might be targeting an NIH or a CDC-related funding mechanism to seed start their innovation for commercialization. And so NIH adapted the program for more of a biotech type of entrepreneur, knowing that we're in a regulated setting, knowing that we're in a complex setting in terms of multi-stakeholders that are involved in our kind of work. Well, fast forward, and this is where I became involved, the National Centers for Advancing Translational Science said, this is a methodology that would also benefit our translational science sites. So I became involved when I was at University of Colorado, and they remain one of the mentor nodes. And over the last 3 years, we've been disseminating this methodology throughout the CTSA programs themselves. These are the Clinical Translation Science Award sites. And as a site, we are maintaining some key principles and elements. This is a training program, and I'll talk a little bit what is really involved then. This is interesting, but really, what is it? It's highly experiential. It's team-based learning approach. And the national program, the teams are very intentionally linked to an industry mentor. At the local site, a team is just 2 people coming together with this energy to want to be able to do the customer discovery and listen to various constituents about the problems they're trying to solve and how their innovation might fit into the workflow. The national program is quite intense, about 8 weeks. Our local program is more variable. It's designed so it fits more into our day-to-day work streams. But at the core of this is this idea of customer discovery, interviews that are cup of coffee conversations. Key learning principle is forcing us to get out of our lab, out of our building, out of our particular healthcare setting, and talk to others about how they perceive the problems that we're trying to solve and what they're currently doing to solve them. We are thinking about customers as people, as not buildings. So we don't say the hospital wants this, or industry says that, or regulators say that. It's who are the decisional people within those systems that we need to talk to and understand their jobs and how they view the problem and what they see as competing alternatives. And in this discovery, we're specifically listening for what are the jobs the various stakeholders are having to do day to day, where are their pain points, and what are they hoping to achieve. And we're listening to their words, not just what we are paraphrasing back to them, but how they articulate that problem. And listening for where is it more critical? There's lots of nice to solve problems out there, but what is the pains or pants on fire pains that's a problem that's going to be enough to motivate someone to change their behavior, to adopt something new? And can we identify that particular customer user in which that pain point is most severe? And that might be what we call a beachhead market. So we might say I have a product that can be used by all primary care physicians, but maybe it's a particular kind of setting and of FQHC and where the problem is most severe. Or maybe it's really early physicians that are experiencing the problem more than senior. And so how do I tailor a solution to really meet their need? We link this, many of you I know are familiar with the patient-centered outcomes research and that philosophy. And so when we say customers, it's very analogous to thinking of this as stakeholders. And so we get you to think about, well, who are the 7 Ps that are related to your area of innovation? The patient or public, what's the healthcare professional or provider, who's making a purchasing decision, who's paying for it, who's setting policy around it, who's the manufacturer and competing, product makers, and are there other research collaborators that are working on this? And now thinking of that in the context like you would if this was a startup company, who's going to use it? Who are the influencers? Who are the recommenders? Who are the decision makers? Who is an economic buyer? And importantly, who's a potential saboteur? We want to improve healthcare costs. So that might mean we want to disrupt and change how healthcare might be delivered in a certain way. Well, there are others who are benefiting for how that healthcare is delivered because that's their source of revenue. And so we want our teams to be thinking about there might be saboteurs or we might not have incentives aligned. And therefore, we need to think strategically in how we design, develop interventions, and think about their dissemination. So the customer discovery method, we say interview. It's like a qualitative method, but it's more of a quality improvement. Can I have a cup of coffee conversation with you? I've often had these over lunch. I've often had them in airports when you're just chatting with someone to get to understand their day. And we go in embracing a beginner's mindset. By definition, we're expert in our area. We need to take ourselves out of expert and really listen to them because they are the expert of their user experience. We listen. We're not selling. We're not trying to get them to evaluate our idea. We're really listening to put ourselves in their daily life. In this way, it's like medical anthropology or ethnography. We're walking in their shoes. And we really have to focus on avoiding confirmation bias, that we're hearing what we want to hear. And we might have some cognitive dissonance about that. And that's a big part of the training is like, how do I take that new knowledge in, reflect on it, and it might mean I need to change what I'm doing or pivot. So we use it by getting them to tell stories. Tell me about the last time you did this problem, and you just let them tell their story and you clarify along the way to understand why they were experiencing and doing what they are. You're listening for process, their motivation, their frustrations. We might ask, so what's keeping you up right now? Where are the biggest pain points? If you had a magic wand, what do you wish could make go away? Here, it's a technique to get to listen for their critical frustrations or their motivators. And then we ask, what are you doing right now to solve this problem or meet that goal? Here, we're trying to understand the competing alternatives. And sometimes the competing alternative is just the status quo. And there's not energy to change the status quo or that inertia. Sometimes we become aware that there is an industry that is also trying to solve that very same problem, not just us from an academic or a clinical research point of view. And therefore, we need to understand what Epic might be doing to solve that problem and how they're thinking of EHR systems, or what Google is doing, or others in the field from public health that may be trying to solve a similar kind of public health problem that overlaps with primary care. And the customer discovery here is that we're listening for themes, we're extracting language, and we're really trying to capture their voice. If you've done community participatory based research and any of those methods, this is highly analogous to that frame. And you put it in a chart, and this is what they call a strong problem solution fit. On one side, you say, here's what I'm hearing are the most important jobs, their pains, their gains. You're really listening to functional, emotional, and social needs. And frankly, a lot of times it's our emotional needs that drive our behavior. And you're matching that up with what can you do with your intervention so that you are solving, you're a problem, you're a pain reliever, you're a gain creator, or you're providing a product or service that directly aligns with the problem job that they're trying to fix. So I provide an example of how we applied this to a cohort discovery tool called the ACT network. It was an EHR-based network that would enable people throughout this research cycle at the design phase, cohort discovery, they get funding, they have to go through IRB or recruitment. They might want to be able to look at EHR data and understand, well, what patients are eligible and how I might want to iterate on eligibility back and forth in order to optimize my ability to complete the trial or accrual to my trial. So we use this methodology to help answer that. The methodology has been published in the Journal of Clinical Translation Science, so you can read more. I talk about this concept of a value proposition hypothesis. At its core, this is what you do in the training. For whom need to do what kind of problem, your idea, your innovation provides really what benefit or solution, unlike what other alternatives? What are you doing? What's your primary area of differentiating? What is the evidence that would compel someone to say, I want to use your idea, tool, intervention, service more than what the other options I have available? So sometimes it helps to see an example. And so I'm going to give a couple of examples. One that I like to use, I used to work at Procter & Gamble many years ago. So we all brush our teeth, right? And this value proposition statement relates back to thinking about who is the key pants on fire problem about toothpaste. And what they learned many years ago is that this was a pants on fire problem for moms of children who are 3 to 5. Why? Well, that's when they're first learning their skills of brushing their teeth. That's when they were first having their first dental appointment. And the mom maybe wants to do a good mom job at that time. This is in the 60s. Now you would say dad job or family member job. But at that time, it was motivating for mom job. I did not want my child to have a bad first dentist visit. I don't want them to have a cavity. I don't want them to cry. I want it to be a pleasant experience. So it was very emotional. It wasn't about, I'm seeking caries-free product. It's moms who want their children to be cavity-free and have that happy first visit. Crest was a fluoridated toothpaste that was clinically proven. And unlike other toothpaste with fluoride, here was the differentiator. The company had decided to get the American Dental Association seal of acceptance. So the mom could have confidence. And how that got disseminated was, if you're old enough like me, you might remember the TV ad, look, mom, no cavities. So it was all about feeding back into the emotional need of the mom and that happy experience of having that dentist visit. Okay. So you can see how it also might relate to this one here. I pulled out the National Diabetes Prevention Program, use similar language. Who is it for? It's those with prediabetes who are motivated to want to prevent or delay the likelihood of developing type 2 diabetes. This program is a structured lifestyle change program that has, again, proven track record. And here the competing alternative might be, unlike do-it-yourself or self-help interventions, it's all packaged together in a partnership that makes this all a lot easier. And so the benefit is about how do you take a complex problem and try to package it so it's easy for adoption. I'm checking my time here, and so let me just make sure we're good here. Another example I wanted to give was one I personally worked on when I was in the pharmaceutical industry, and that was thinking about a product, Azicol, which is mesalamine delayed release product. And here the adopter were gastroenterologists. This was in the 1990s. And the product was indicated as a first-line treatment for ulcerative colitis. Now, it had a functional benefit. It was the first sulfur-free agent. And for about 15% of patients or so, they experienced some form of a sulfa side effect. And maybe 3% or up to 5%, depending, had a serious enough one that warranted some intervention. And so when the product was first, the value proposition was, look, we're the first sulfur-free agent. Physicians said, well, this is great. We needed that. And they thought of it in that context. It's a functional benefit. I'll use this product when a patient develops a sulfa reaction. But what we did in our customer discovery is we heard the pain point is that having, as you all know, as physicians, you don't know necessarily who's going to have a sulfa reaction. It's unpredictable. You might not know the severity of it, and it can be disruptive. It could take you away from dealing with other urgent clinical care issues. It could be disruptive and occur on your personal time over a weekend. So when we flip the value proposition as one of avoid the unpredictability or the hassle of managing a patient with a sulfa reaction, just avoid that problem, start with this drug first. Now the value proposition had much more salience to the audience. Now, of course, this is a company marketing it, but it was what I took away from that is really listening to the emotional need behind something. It's often not just a functional problem that's being solved. And in this case, it took the product from about a 15% market share. That makes sense, right? It was about when people had a sulfa reaction to about a 70% market share. And so that gives you an example of like when you really touch into what's a motivating benefit, it really facilitates your adoption. And so we should be listening for that same way in the interventions that we do for health and patient benefit. So if you go through the program, you learn the skill of asking these questions so that you can help design your interventions, adapt them to better address maybe different populations for an equity lens, and also generate preliminary data. And for some of you, you might be interested in commercialization. And so it's a pathway to tap into the national commercialization training. But it's not just commercial entrepreneurs. It's also, as I said, benefits if you're trying to design a program, if you're trying to adapt a program, if you have a program, you're trying to think about how do I sustain it once the grant ends. And for some, it's like a great new tool in implementation science that's very pragmatic, and you can use it for the rest of your career, and it fits nicely as a learning tool in career development. So I'm going to share a testimonial, and then I'll just show how you can tap into I-Corps resources, and then we'll be done. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides. I'm going to now share the video. Make sure I do this right. Rachel, if you guys could just make sure that the sound is coming through when I click on it. Are you seeing the general screen?
We are, yeah.
Okay. Are you hearing sound? I thought the I-Corps program would be an excellent fit for the Parkinson's School. In our very name, we're a school of health sciences and public health. We bring a systems lens to how we think about health problems. And as a new school, we're entrepreneurial in our very spirit. I-Corps stands for Innovation Corps, like AmeriCorps or Army Corps of Engineers. And it was first developed in the early 2010s by the National Science Foundation. They realized that the U.S. spends billions of dollars at academic universities developing cool science, technology, engineering, and a lot of those cool things don't make it out broadly into the real world. So they worked with serial entrepreneurs out of Stanford to create a program very similar to how a tech startup thinks about talk to customers, iterate with customers, and really understand what is your value proposition. And that led to this program.
The project that we submitted for I-Corps, it was for a community-based research network. Ideally, we want to create a tool or resource for community-based organizations and for researchers to be able to align on research projects.
I-Corps helps someone think of their idea with the end in mind. And how do we develop in the beginning with that end in mind as opposed to waiting to the end and saying, okay, now what?
What I offered is to develop a tool that uses artificial intelligence and provide dosing recommendation for our pharmacist and IC.
Our 5-week program is run more kind of a boot camp style. And I think the beauty of being able to be part of the recruitment process, as well as continuing to engage with students and faculty throughout the 5 weeks, is really that transformation process that I see teams go through.
Each week we present our progress, and separately each week we met with our mentors. My mentor, Dean Morrato, she said that, Sammy, you need to go one step further of understanding who is your customer. Who are you designing these tools for? How do you know they would like it?
We conducted 30 interviews. Our customers were the researchers and community-based organizations. I-Corps allowed me the time, the freedom, the opportunity to ask questions and to have questions asked of me and to figure things out.
What happens is they're following the Ignatian path of discernment, where they're realizing, oh, I have to redefine my problem. I have to really listen, because what I thought was the problem, or I thought was the solution, it's not the problem and it's not the solution. So the word we use is pivot, and they have to pivot. I can't see anything more Ignatian, more Jesuit-based than that. And so I think really it's I-Corps and ANCATS is central to what we do at Loyola.
By the end of the course, you will have your business canvas much more sensible than what you had before. I think what I learned in I-Corps is not something specific for a time or for a specific project. It's like when you are creating something, when you are developing or solving an issue, think about everyone involved and make sure you consider the entire system.
To solve these complex health problems, it takes more than a School of Health Sciences and Public Health. We've got to work with many different stakeholders in many different settings. And so that's why I'm very excited about the fact that the I-Corps NCATS program is embedded not only in Parkinson's School of Health Sciences and Public Health, but that we're embedded within Loyola University Chicago, that brings a real common goal or mission to address social justice and issues of equity in how we think about our innovation.
Okay. I'm now going to go back to slide. As I'm doing that, I know that was a bit of a Parkinson's school. Let's see. Advertisement. So, but I think you get a sense of it. Part of it is what you're going to get is knowledge as it relates to your particular project and innovation. And part of it is learning to listen and to be customer or stakeholder or patient constituent focused, and to be, as Sammy talked about it, taking a systems full understanding of the problem. Now, Dr. Tutuni has a KL2, and so he got the KL2 through the ITM, and it's helping him develop his artificial intelligence, machine learning application in a hospital prescribing system. But the I-Corps is a complement to that. And by him taking the I-Corps program, he's now also working on an implementation science seat award. And so the last few slides is just to make sure you're all aware that if you are curious about this, think it might fit your needs. There are resources here through the work of Sean's group connecting into the ITM in our implementation science cluster. So we have educational, but the I-Corps fits into the stakeholder center design and implementation scale up. The program we have is offered twice a year. If you go through this training program, you can also apply for a customer discovery seed grant. That might enable you to get out of the Chicago area and perhaps go to a national conference and listen more intently in other settings if you're at that stage of scale up. Or it can be used if you want to go very deep into your setting and you need to do more interviews. The dollars can be used to help support a student or a research assistant in terms of time coverage that allows you that additional time for continued discovery. And so we can talk more on the panel. This is being led by Dr. Michael Bloom and Merle Thomas as our I-Corps training leaders. They are still taking teams right now for the fall cohort, but the next cohort will be also in the winter, spring. And so this is something that you could be thinking about and planning for in a predictable way. We will be offering these courses twice a year. It's free and it's a hybrid combination. In the panel discussion, I'm sure we can answer more questions. If you've had I-Corps either as a prerequisite or a co-requisite, it opens up the opportunity to take the next step. And that's what we've called as implementors in residence. So this is where you're taking the customer discovery insight coupled with what you already have been collecting about your intervention and have a mentored approach to be thinking about the scale up of that intervention. What's necessary as support for dissemination or sustainability. And so it's a structured mentored time with someone that's part of our implementation science cluster, but also some seed funds that can be used to gather additional information, data, resources, et cetera, to facilitate what might be added data or evidence necessary to get an economic buyer to say yes, for example. So that's how the I-Corps program fits in with the ITM. And I am going to stop now. And I think I did pretty well on timing. So I'm quite delighted, Sean, with myself.
You should be. It was one great presentation. Thank you, Elaine. I'm going to hand this over to Rachel, who's going to field the Q&A. And we encourage participants to enter questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Morrato. That was an exciting program. I can't wait to see what comes out of that. So yes, like Dr. David said, please go ahead. If you have any questions, please enter them into the chat. I'm happy to field them to Dr. Morrato during this time. I'll give you a minute.
While those questions are coming in, Dr. Morrato, I wanted to ask you if you're aware if any of the health systems in Chicagoland are using customer discovery approaches like this that you've seen in industry as part of their marketing.
That's an excellent question. You have a better finger on the pulse of the Chicago health systems. Are you seeing evidence of that?
I'm not sure. I mean, that the marketing research that happens is in another silo from the health sciences research. So a lot of it's very cryptic from where we sit.
Yeah.
But I just wonder if there's ways to synergize with that to bring a health equity lens more. And I do think that industry leaders are part of their mission includes promoting health equity. So maybe it's just a matter of different languages.
Yeah, I imagine that the good health systems, you know, you see the billboards on the highways, right? And how different health systems are positioning themselves. That was probably listening to how people decide which health system, if they have a choice, they sign up for, or which ones they seek, you know, care for cancer or what have you. And so I often see that, so my own area of interest is in drug safety and like adoption of FDA warnings, for example. And as I work with people who do drug safety, there's the same silo within industry. Like they're designing things that will become regulation with FDA. And they're often not, they're R&D type people, and they're often not talking to the marketing side that has a good understanding. Well, how is healthcare delivered? You know, what's going to be feasible? What's going to be easily to adopt? And so I often am advising people, we often say, well, that's them and this is us, but rather like, what can we learn from each other in that quest? And if a health system, like you said, is grounded in part of our mission is a health equity or improving the health around us, how do we take like the wisdom of the researcher side that has been intimately involved in understanding these barriers or challenges or designing improvement and marry that with the buyer, the payer, the economic decision maker within a healthcare system, so that ideally that would be the business model that's a win-win, right? It's how do you make the business case for the health equity such that the job to be done by the CFO is also meeting the need of the mission part as well. And so I think these methods can be a way of doing that. When I was at Procter & Gamble, we did customer discovery as a team. So it would have the advertising people, it would have the researcher people that never were close to the market, listening to what consumers or patients are saying. It would have salespeople involved. It would have regulatory affairs involved as well. And it really is a team activity, because we're all listening with different lenses. And then collectively, how do you design an intervention that's going to thrive and sustain itself while meeting the population goal we have? While we're waiting for questions, people may not. A common question we get asked is, wow, do I have, who's a team? How hard is this? And really, a team to participate is just two people. It can be a community member with someone that's in the health system that wants to do this together. And so sometimes, as we heard, it's the protected time to help build that relationship in a way that your co-learning can be useful. Sometimes I've seen programs in which it's two staff members. They're observing something that's going on in the clinic setting from a quality improvement, and they wish it could be designed better or differently, so they come through the program. Sometimes it's the classic, researcher with mentee, like a postdoc fellow or something like that, or it can be two students going through. It's very flexible. But at its core is that it's a team, because we hear and learn and differently, and we help one another in completing these interviews too.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we have two questions, and this one's from Lauren Keenan Devlin. Can you talk more about an example of using this methodology for sustainability? She's actively thinking about this for a current intervention.
Yes. Okay. Let's see. I'll give one that's my own personal example, because it's top of my mind right now. I mentioned the ACT network. Within the ITM, you might hear about it as the LEAF project, right? And so it's this idea that you can connect electronic health record systems between different institutions, and you could go into this computer-based portal and say, I wonder if Rush has these kinds of patients. Let me put in characteristics based on data that might be in the electronic health record. Okay. And I'm curious about it. But once you have that kind of data network, like in Chicago with Capricorn, there's lots of other research questions that might be posed by it. And so there's excitement about that. So NIH has funded the next phase of this ACT network called ENACT. And ENACT is, still a collaboration of about, 40 academic medical campuses across the country. They're contributing in electronic health record data into this data repository. And the question we get asked is, well, why should we be spending our time putting the data into this? What's the so what to us, right? The NIH funder is saying, we're going to fund you for 5 years. We're not going to fund you for the rest of your life. If you want to maintain this data network, you need to be thinking about sustainability from the beginning. So what we've been doing is the same customer discovery with CTSA organizations, the PIs, people who are doing work with this kind of electronic health record data, the informatics people at these various sites, and really trying to understand where there are many data networks. Where is the unmet need in data network, and how might our data network provide value? One area we hear is to help with trainees. Our medical students learn how to use these kind of data for their research. And so we're listening here. I won't say we have the final answer, but we're listening for different value proposition statements that are coming out of it that are motivating enough for the CTSA to say it's worth my time and energy to continue uploading data into your data network. So that's how we're using it in real time to inform how we might sustain this at work, knowing that we're going to not have funding in 3 years. That's what the NIH has said. You know, we're not here to be funding your network for life. So that's one example.
Thank you so much. Our next question comes from Malin Martinez. I am one of Sammy's co-KL2 scholars, so I was lucky to hear him present his research in progress yesterday. His work has many similarities to mine, and I wondered, when building a new tool such as ML/AI tool, how does implementation science apply to the implementation of the tool? I asked because IS should be applied to evidence-based interventions, and our tools are not evidence-based just yet. I noticed this was giving his tools some issues with buy-in.
I'm curious what the issues with buy-in meaning it's not evidence-based, I'm assuming. Yes. So that's what I was saying earlier in my talk. The field has generally been, you should not implement broadly until you're evidence-based. Exactly what you're saying. Where the field is now going is that we should be doing steps that are formative, preliminary pilot data that is all in the context of conceptualization and at the design phase of the intervention. So knowing that we're going to begin with the end in mind, we want to start listening for those needs early, and that will inform what might be some strategic decisions we make and how the intervention is designed. So when Dr. Tatuni was talking about this systems approach, that means oftentimes we say, oh, we're doing this for the physician, or we're doing this for the nurse staff. It's going to benefit the patient. And we just focus on that two stakeholders without thinking about, well, who's going to pay for this? What does the chief informatics officer think about it? Are there issues as it relates to a tool that already Epic is doing, for example? That's the so the I-Corps gets you thinking about who are all the stakeholders that are also trying to solve similar problems. So you're using you're moving the strategy thinking, design thinking upstream, not waiting until you're done. And then you go, oh gosh, I designed something that no one really is wanting the way I thought. You're using that, you're gathering that information earlier, knowing that you're going to have to keep validating it along the way. Sometimes it takes many years to do development. But once you're now validating along the way your assumptions. So that's how you would use this early.
Thank you so much. And our last question is from Fran Weaver. This strategy seems like it could be very valuable for grant proposals. The VA promotes veteran engagement and development of research projects, which does have some elements of discovery. Do you see this integrated into any granting agencies?
Yes, excellent. Well, we've been integrating it in as an implementation science method. So that the I-Corps is a method that helps you with that conceptual framework of fit to context. And so if it depends on the stage you are with the grant, it can be used, I've written it in as a method in that one grant I was talking about. So the electronic health record, NCATS, their particular program announcement said you need to address sustainability, scalability of whatever tools you're developing. So we said, we are using this I-Corps method as the method for doing that work. And we wrote it in that way. It can be used as preliminary data. Sometimes you might want to talk about your innovation in a way to say it's feasible. And so you could use it as preliminary data and you talk about it in that. There are folks that will then publish off of the information that they collect. Sometimes it's embedded. I've seen it written into career development awards, those kinds of funding mechanisms. And so this is where we think our innovation is, in that we're trying to say it's not just for commercialization. It can be used as an implementation design tool. And so stay tuned. we're building out the science base so that you have those kinds of papers to cite. So you have a methods paper to cite when you're putting it into those grants. But I do say that we are seeing more and more funding agencies wanting to have consideration of implementation. And I'm seeing funding agencies looking at the implementation cross-section with health equity as well. Like I was on a study sections over the summer, one with NIMH and another one with ARC. And both of them were very interested in these topic areas. So we're happy, as you know, Fran, as an implementation science cluster to work with you if you're needing a special consult. Some researchers have, within the ITM, have done a trio studio on this very particular topic. And so that's one way to get a specialized consult to help you with your research.
Thank you so much. I think that's all the time we have for questions now. Please continue to enter any introductions, such as Chris Bow, and any more questions that you may have for Dr. Morrato, and we'll make sure that she gets them, and that that we get all that to her via email. So please feel free as we continue with our panel.
I just want to say I am delighted, Chris, that you are here. So this is exactly the kind of connections that we're hoping to make. So I'm just delighted that you're hearing what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will now hand it back over to Dr. David to introduce our expert panelists for the Incubator Hub panel.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and welcome, Chris. We go way back, actually. I'm glad that you're on our seminar. So now is an opportunity for our next segment to introduce our three expert panelists who will provide some additional insight into the implications of this research. Dr. Michael Bloom is the founding director for the Center for Health Innovation and Entrepreneurship. He's also an associate clinical professor at Loyola University's Parkinson School of Health Sciences and Public Health. Merle Thomas is the administrator for the Center for Health Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the Parkinson School at Loyola. And Claire Rittenhouse is our North Shore ITM I-Corps navigator. She also serves in other roles with the Department of Family Medicine at North Shore. So welcome to our panel, and to Dean Morrato, you're also welcome to join into the discussion. So please stay online. We have, at this point, had a really vibrant and exciting presentation about the scope of implementation science and how it is become a part of health equity research in our Chicagoland area. And so I'd like to go to the panel and ask, how do we implement results from this research to advance health equity in our health systems? We'll start with that question, and then we will move on to some of the other discussion questions. So any initial thoughts?
So I think, thank you, Dr. Dave. Thank you, Sean. I think that I-Corps, this program, is all about translating innovation to impact. That's why I came to Loyola, and I really enjoy working on I-Corps and being affiliated with the ITM, because it's not enough, as Dean Morrato was explaining. I mean, you have great research, evidence-based, but at the end of the day, if you can't take it from the bench to patient to populations, then what have you done? So it's all about translating an innovation for impact, an innovative solution, and especially in terms of health equity. I will say that our North Star at the Parkinson School is all about access to the best care for everyone. So health equity is integrated into our very DNA. And the teams that we accept for I-Corps training are all basically coming up with solutions that can improve health equity, reduce health disparity. So that's sort of, part of everything of who we are. But at the end of the day, again, it's about the research translation, and it's about the customer discovery that will eventually get you there. I will say that also Dean Morrato did make a distinction between NSF-funded commercialization as a focus for I-Corps. I-Corps and NCATS specifically is much more directed at research translation for impact. We have had in the past some startups that had interesting technologies that would improve health equity and were on a path to commercialization. What's unique, what our value proposition is with I-Corps and NCATS is you can be a person working on community programs, informatics tools. You just need to have a solution to a major health problem that's going to improve health equity. And I think that's what's really unique. There are great programs out there all throughout the country in SF, but we're not solely invested in commercialization. The last thing that I do want to make sure that I make this point for any researchers who are on this, part of this program listening in the audience, when we say customer and customer discovery, it's not necessarily that you're trying to do a business or commercialize a particular product. We use customer for stakeholder, for the user, who is going to use the solution that you're coming up with. So I just want to be, because some people in the past have viewed, well, this is, you're talking about business. I don't have the business. No, but you may have a health equity innovation. You may have a health equity solution, and you need to see how we can, you can translate this research, for impact. And that's by speaking to users really early in an almost naive way at the very beginning and listening to what your potential users have to say and what their pain points are, what their problems. Okay, I'll be quiet now. Merle or Claire, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just to add to that, which thank you so much, Dr. Bloom, Mike. I think that as an outside perspective, I do want to say that, as I've gotten to know what I-Corps is all about, it really does facilitate the transformation of innovation and invention, but that innovation is nothing if it doesn't include health equity and bettering our healthcare's patient experience and the quality of their care. I think that Loyola has recognized this and built this into their program through their customer discovery methods and key learning principles. I mean, Loyola, I think that you've done an excellent job at doing what public health is meant to really get towards, which is considering an entire system and not just a majority or an easy to address population, and rather bringing in people's voices and having them inform us instead of us assuming that we already know the answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Claire. And I think, are we ready to move on to the next question? Because I think that's a great lead in.
We sure could. I think that we're at a point where we want to think of community and health systems as, I guess, being without walls so that we can be in the community. And so thinking about healthcare delivery and health equity using this set of tools, what are some thoughts about how to better, I guess, triangulate between stakeholders who have community interest, healthcare industry interests, and then I think more kind of idealistic population health, mission-oriented interests, trying to actually improve the outcomes. How do we improve triangulation so that we can be thinking about this as one set of issues to take on together?
Add, so I think what you're raising is really interesting because we operate in siloed worlds, don't we? And we're often trying to address the same root health problem, but only from the silo that we operate, so a healthcare system or a public health community. So I think if you can ideally get a team that then goes out, as we were hearing, and it really talks to, you're not just talking to people who are in your silo, but you're talking across the, I'll say the 7 Ps. A big piece of it is really starting first, well, who else is trying to solve this problem?
Yeah.
Sometimes the people in the healthcare system don't realize that the public health community is doing a very similar activity, or they don't realize that there's a company that's trying to, commercialize an app that's trying to solve that very same problem, right? And so they're coming at it from a private company sector. So I think the value of it, part of the value of the I-Corps is to pause yourself and really take a zoom out and look at, do I have the right people on my team? Am I talking to all of the different constituents that might be involved, so that as I'm gathering information, on how do we address the health equity, I'm using a more zoomed out system view as opposed to a zoomed in, here's where I'm operating view.
Right. To your point, Elaine, one of the major things that we do is we have our teams do ecosystem mapping. The ecosystem isn't just in your health system, or it's not just in your community, it's much larger in terms of identifying those stakeholders. I will also say that, we had in our spring cohort, we had a team from Rush and we had a team from IIT who were both focused on different aspects of community-based research and creating community-based research network. That's within the ITM. So it was a real occasion across, and I think this is critical, that we have researchers across such great institutions. Our partner institutions on the ITM are really world class, but we have to talk to each other, and beyond sort of at a committee level or leadership level for ITM. These are people, these are staff members who are working on community-based research who need to be able to connect. So even within the ITM, it's an important opportunity, I think, for teams at North Shore to connect with teams at Loyola and Advocate and et cetera. And I think that's critical. The other piece is, I will tell you that this also reflects not only I-Corps. I have to do a mini commercial, I'm sorry, and mini ad, but it really speaks to this. We do every year, we do a health equity quest through working together with Matter, the healthcare accelerator, as well as other external partners and internal partners at Loyola. And the point of this is to convene. We're having one November 8th on a summit on climate change and healthcare delivery at Matter. And the point is we're bringing people from industry together. We're bringing academic researchers. We're bringing policy people. We're bringing people from health systems who are all focusing on a similar problem. So this not only, our approach not only affects, is described in I-Corps, but also in terms of the programs that we want to do for the Parkinson School. And that is, how do we convene people?
Right.
Together, we're working on that to promote health equity.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I will also say, Sean, going back to your question about triangulation, oftentimes when teams or individuals, I should say, reach out to us in terms of putting a team together, and they may not have sufficient people from their own institution. But this, what we've seen in the last couple of years is cross-institutional and interdisciplinary collaboration coming together. That's the beauty of the ITM, right? And so personally, I enjoy connecting researchers across different institutions, because I know there's a potential project or innovation that's happening at Rush that might pair well with UChicago or with Loyola, and just being able to do that introductions, across our institutions. And then also, just centering health equity in these potential innovations, where we're walking teams through validating the strategic business model so that you are introducing that diverse customer discovery, right? And so you can expand your pool of stakeholders so that you're going to get considered like racial and ethnic minority populations that may not have come to mind earlier, and under-resourced end users of your potential innovations as well. And so just exploring how do you expand that pool of stakeholders through this customer interview and customer discovery process that we take teams through.
Yeah, I was just thinking about there were several transdisciplinary centers funded by NIH, by NIMHD. There were a series of them on health equity. And then through NCI and NIDA, that they had the P50s that supported transdisciplinary tobacco use. But one of the excellent things that these programs did is they taught transdisciplinarianism. They, as a discipline, they taught people how to learn other people's language and to begin to build teams with flat hierarchies of representing multiple different lenses. And I do think our ITM is really built around that model as well. But as someone who does pharmacogenomics research, I'm thinking about what Dr. Morrato said about drug safety and how we see gene-drug interactions, mediated by a number of different social determinants affecting risk of ER visits and hospital readmissions. We have a new, I think we'll soon have a new grant to do some work in that area. But there's a need there for a lot of people on medications who aren't tracked and who don't have the resources, who, if there was pharmacovigilance and it was, purposeful, it might keep a lot of people out of the ER with angioedema and all kinds of, hemorrhage and other things that could be prevented. And it's a health equity issue. So I'm thinking my dribble wheel is going around and around about all the different stakeholders who should care about this. Patients care about it, communities care about it, mental health community cares about it. There's a lot of adverse drug reactions around neuroleptics and antidepressants. How do we get them all in the same room as a sustainable model so we can take on drug safety, but think about all the layers of the onion and the process? And it seems like maybe that's what we're trying to do here, but it seems like every time we do, it's a new project. It's a new, so sustainability. I want to just take a pause and note that Merle entered the registration for the fall I-Corps program in the chat. So if anyone is interested in I-Corps, whether it's the fall or the spring, you can please click on that and save it to your bookmarks so that we can get some teams signed up. That's something we would love to see more from North Shore and other IT institutions.
And I'll put a plug in. Teams that go through this can get access to that $25,000 award. We have one $25,000 award still available for this this year. So incentive, if there's a team that goes through this fall and wants to continue going with the implementation component of it, the odds of funding are high, or ever with you, if you.
Yeah, did you hear that, everybody?
Because we would love to have it. We would love, right now we have a Loyola, we have an Advocate. We would love to have a North Shore project.
Fantastic. Absolutely. Yeah, we're shamelessly plugging I-Corps here. That's what we're trying to do. And it's in everyone's interest here because there's quite a charm at the other end of the program for people, for teams, for implementation science grants. And Dr. Bowe put a comment, individuals may want to consider participating in the Nurse Hack for Health this weekend, a pre-ITM core exercise. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And then Naleli mentioned we also have the I-Corps Seed Award, $2,500. So that's another thing I think for novices like me who are trying to learn this area. If you have an idea and you just want to kind of start off with some piloting, then that would be great to provide some funding. So, and do individuals need to be doing I-Corps to be eligible for the $2,500 seed?
Yes.
So, okay. Excellent. Well, I want to move on to the next discussion question, which is, how do we apply learnings from today to policy change to promote equitable care and outcomes? So policy change could be anything from hospital policies to new legislation, to working with regulators and how to promote equitable care and outcomes. So it's really a broad tabula rasa here, but any thoughts about policy change that we'd like to see happen?
I think for me, I'm sort of so focused on issues of innovation. And Elaine had put earlier maps of the valleys of death, both in translational science and in commercialization. And I think that there's a huge valley of death in innovation in terms of health equity. In terms of innovations, you have hospital systems, you have researchers, you have companies who are doing great work, phenomenal pilot work in providing equitable care, reducing health disparities, dealing with social determinants of health. And yet, how do you sustain and scale them? How do you promote interaction, collaboration, cross-sectoral collaboration, transdisciplinary collaboration? How do you get people talking to each other so that we can actually scale these innovations in health equity? And I think that's missing policy. That's a key sort of piece. I don't know if CMS does that. I don't know if we have government do it, or from an industry perspective. I know if we expect to move the needle in health equity, if we expect to really have a strong business case for health equity, we have to somehow bridge the valley of death in terms of sharing and scaling innovations and health equity.
So you think there needs to be more nimble funding mechanisms from government to that, almost like VCs to get in there and work with companies for different rounds of funding?
Absolutely. I think that would be a great idea. What's the incentive? What's the incentive for people to work together? What can government provide? How is this integrated into value-based care, funding mechanisms moving into the future? How are people incentivized? How are companies incentivized? Beyond a case where, well, it's an important moral imperative that we do, or, we waste so much money, it's sort of a macroeconomic case for it. What are specific incentives that I, as a company or as a healthcare system, to have from the government that's going to have me moving in the right direction?
Yeah, I'd be curious to know if there's new thinking about funding, de-risking research early on, and then some extension beyond 5 years to get things into the next phase of translation or implementation. 7-year grants, 10. Never heard of that.
Right.
But 5 years is just not enough.
Yeah, or you could look at what PCORI has done. They've linked the ability to get like dissemination awards. If you've already gotten the PCORI Evidence Generation Award, you are therefore able to apply for the dissemination piece. And since we have an NCATS program officer on, I think this sort of mechanism by which we think about that PCORI model is one, right? The other piece that I used to teach health policy. So a lot of this is, if you're in the policy legislative realm, you're doing customer discovery too. You're just thinking of it as your customer are politicians, or your customers are taxpayers. The framing of it is different, but the listening and the work and the strategizing, of how do you scaffold social entrepreneurism right now, right? So how do you do the financial incentive? And we had a speaker come in here at Loyola, and he was talking about the work that he's done in the area of, how do you promote diversity, equity, inclusion uptake in organizations? And he shared that we as social animals, as humans, we bring our own innate social orientation. And about half of us, he'll call like dolphins, are willing to do it because it's the right thing to do. We swim together and it's like the right thing to do. About another third or so are what he called ostriches, and that's like, is it in my best interest? I'm not against it, but how am I incentivized to do it, right? So, and then there's another 10, 15% that are like sharks, and if it's going to take, they see everything as win-lose, right? Not win-win. And so if you think of it, you need different policies for different segments of constituents. And that would be where an ICOR might think of it as, Well, those are different target customer groups. How do we develop policies or things that are addressing each of those groups? Because the need might be different if we're trying to get 100% embracing health equity.
Yeah. Well,
And I will add to that, last week I was part of a seminar addressing climate change, and there was someone at the city of Chicago level, and he, was sharing that oftentimes, academic researchers come to him seeking out policy change, but it's a white paper that's handed over and just basically saying, here, operationalize this. And he's like, I can't do that, right? Have you validated this potential research? Who's the market? Who's the community that's in need of this? And so I think going through a training immersion like an I-Corps program really informs your research planning process, revising those objective study questions, your design to center, health equity, that it can be something that's operationalizable.
Yeah. I was just thinking about the National Academy of Medicine or National Academies of Sciences approach, where there are sponsors that go to the national academies and say, we would like to fund a study on this so we can then use those guidelines to do our policy. So CMS might fund something, or DOD might fund something, or there might even be some industry. I don't know about that, but that idea where the market's already there, and just provide the evidence so we can then apply it and go. But it's a different model, but then, in a way it's shovel ready. So I'd be curious to know, if that's something to think about. And also the SBIR model, can that be built upon as well? Because I'm sure that there's been a lot of learnings from SBIRs about what it takes to turn something into a sustainable. But at any rate, we're coming to the end of our time, but I wanted to go to the final discussion question, which is translational science, which is how can we advance the science of translational science to improve health equity? And is that really what this is, Elaine, or is there more science design that's needed here to, get where we want to go? And I think that's going to be more important with future CTSA applications is how do we take the scientific methodology development approach to this, and where do we go next?
Yeah. Right. I look at implementation science as a method that's trying to address translational science barriers which relate to adoption and sustainability of innovation. So maybe there are some, how we think of mechanisms. Funding mechanisms. I mean, I was reflecting on what you were just saying. If I was back at my days at P&G, it was always with commercialized. I mean, it was always about sustainability and growth, and so there was investment made. A company will look at it as market shaping, but let's say you need a clinical guideline in place in order to say, where does your product fit in? Or you were mentioning some, policy or procedure. Well, a commercial interest will be saying, well, that takes a while to get together. How can I catalyze that? And, are there those kind of funding mechanisms? That's not a research question. It's a collaboration question. It's a policy advancing question that doesn't really fit into any of the funding agencies' realm. And so that's part of the translational science problem. If I'm an NIH funded researcher, where do I go to get funding to do that work? I have to be creative, entrepreneurial. And sometimes that's not always valued at the institution, depending on what institution you're at, what's your indirects on that, The incentive is not to work with foundations. The incentive is to work, in a very structured, incremental research way. We respond that way in our academics because that's how we're incentivized, right?
So maybe this is some, a dialogue we could begin to have with NCATS and with other stakeholders who are interested in addressing questions of how do we look at the design of funding programs so that they are more sustainable. And so maybe future seminar on that topic. Just a thought.
Great, yeah.
And then Dr. Bo says there's several programs built to facilitate entry into the NHS-BIR system. So, maybe that we want to hear about some of those programs.
Right. And those are wonderful if you're thinking of a commercializable innovation.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Morrato, to Claire, Murley, Dr. Bloom. This has been just fantastic, really invigorating, and I appreciate everyone's very insightful comments. There is a survey link for an evaluation. We do ask that you fill that in. It will help us. We also are collecting information for the ITM about a net promoter score, about how impactful this is. We want to know how useful this is for you all. So please do fill in the evaluation. Our next seminar is going to be on Tuesday, October 17th. And Dr. Carlos Jen from University of Texas will be our presenter on imagining better primary care for Latinos. What are the key questions that need to be answered? So we're excited for Dr. Jen. He's a member of the U.S. Prevention Services Task Force and a real leader in patient-centered medical home as well. So, and there will be a recording posted shortly as well. Rachel, any comments before we sign off?
No, thank you. This was wonderful. No comments from me.
Excellent, excellent, everyone, and great participation. And welcome, Dr. Bo, to our seminar series. And we look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you.